Okay, welcome everyone. Good morning. Welcome to Hire Moment Mastermind. Delighted to have you here. This is a weekly free job search call to answer your toughest job search questions. My name is Shira Lotzar, and I am delighted to be your host today. And just want to do a couple of introductions. Just first introduce myself very quickly. I'm an association recruiter, a career coach. I write resumes and LinkedIn profiles, help folks with their networking and interviewing. I'm also the co-founder and volunteer of boomerworks.org, which is a volunteer community-driven nonprofit helping professionals to re-career into self-employment, those especially who are age 50 plus. I'm delighted to be joined today by my guest experts, Julian Bois, who is an executive recruiter in accounting and finance, Corliss Jackson, who's a career coach and specializes exclusively in federal government resumes, KiKi L'Italienne, who's actually a little bit going to be joining us a little bit later today. Hopefully she'll join us soon, and Mike Robinson, who's a career coach and a former recruiter with government contracting and high tech. He worked for Boeing and BAE. So we have a kind of a full panel today of folks to help you with your job search. So with that, let me just quickly go over today's format. Please remain mute when you're in the main room, and you can post questions in the chat box. We will begin with a 5-minute breakout room to identify your group's top question. For those of you who were with us last week when we tried this out, yours truly kind of messed up the Zoom room a little bit, and I unfortunately kind of made the minutes a little too short. So this time, hopefully it'll be better and you'll have full 5 minutes. And in that breakout room, what you're going to do is you're going to figure out your group's top question to put into the chat box. But if you can come up with a second question, that's fine. We do have 45 minutes, so hopefully we'll have time for everything. We will address any advanced questions first. So for those of you who put questions in the Google form prior to the meeting, we'll go over those first, and there are actually 4 of those, and then we'll address those that you put into the chat today. A recording of this Q&A session will be posted on my website, purposefulhire.com/hire moment mastermind, and a new bonus feature starting today at 10 o'clock after the Q&A portion is completed. We will break into a 15-minute speed networking breakout session. So that'll be a fantastic time for you guys to start networking with each other, share leads and resources, hopefully encouragement for your job search journey. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get into the breakout rooms here. And so what'll happen is you will go ahead, and when you see a little box that says that there'll be a little blue join box, you're gonna want to hit that. So go ahead. Well, it's going to take just a minute here for me to set this up. Give me a moment. Sorry, it's taking an extra second. All right, here we go. So make sure to hit the blue join button, and once you enter your room, you'll have 5 minutes to chat with each other.
Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. We are all in breakout rooms right now, and let me go ahead and move you to to 1.
Okay.
Do you see the,
See the questions.
oh no, do you see the breakout room? I guess you don't. You should have a breakout room, a join button.
Join breakout room. You've assigned breakout room 1.
Yeah, go ahead and hit the join button.
Got
Marissa, Shoshi, and Pete, you should have, if you'd like to join a breakout room for a couple minutes, you should see a join button. And we're just looking at we're trying to find our top job search question in each group. All right. So everybody should be back now. Hope that was an enjoyable few minutes there. Go ahead, if there's one speaker from your group or one scribe, feel free to pop into the chat box your top job search question. Hopefully it's broad enough that most people would appreciate the question. And maybe you can put in a second one if you like. We will do our best to answer what we can today. So just to kick us off, we're going to start with the advanced questions. Those of you who put some questions in the chat box. Now, these first 2 questions happen to be about getting into the federal government, and Corliss Jackson is our federal government expert. I'll read these questions and then have her jump into a few pointers after that. So this person said, it's a broad question, I know, but I've been having a hard time getting a foothold in the government. I filter positions on USA Jobs and I use their resume builder tool, but no news so far. And the second is that it's been said that the best way to get hired for a position is not through job postings, but through networking. How can networking be used to get hired in the federal government? So Corliss, feel free to share with us a few tips. I know you could talk for the next few hours about this topic, but feel free to share a few tips with us.
I'll keep it short. So in my small group, there were several questions. So I'm going to kind of address all of this at once. So one of the things that, well, actually two of the things that really hold up job seekers in terms of federal employment is the resume and applying to jobs that are in alignment with your background. So first thing I like to discuss really quickly about the resume is that it's a very different resume than the corporate resume. It's a skill-based resume where you have to describe the skills that you have and the processes that you used to get to the accomplishments. Whereas a corporate resume focuses more on the accomplishments and the results and the quantitative. The USA Jobs or the federal resume focuses on what you did to get to that point. So it's all about the processes you engaged in, and you have to document those very clearly. I don't recommend using the resume builder. I like to use the upload feature, and there's some reasons for that, because you can structure some things a little bit differently, you can format differently, you can highlight things that they won't be able to see if you use the resume builder. Secondly, let's talk a little bit about networking. I like to say that the federal government leads with your package, your resume, how you answer the assessment questionnaire, and then you interview, you network, and then you interview and you land the position. Corporate sector, completely different process, and I'm going to turn it over to Shira to talk a little bit more about that. But networking can help, but it's later on in the process after you already have a great package put together and you've submitted that to USA Jobs.
Corliss, do you want to give them one tip about how to do the networking once they've actually applied through USA Jobs, maybe an interesting way to do it?
Yeah, so once you've applied to USA Jobs and you get referred, which means you're in that top category, you're cream of the crop, you will have the opportunity to get selected for an interview. This is where you can interject yourself into the process, meaning if you can find who that that hiring manager is, and it's not going to be listed on the announcement. It's going to be research that you do. Maybe you look at the org chart and you see that a particular division has this person as its director, and the position that you're applying to reports to that position, right? So you have to do some research to figure that out. And then you know somebody who works in that agency who can put in a good word for you. That's how you're going to network. And it's a very intricate process in the government because it's not utilized a lot. If you can understand what well, let me back up. If you don't know somebody in that role, you don't know somebody in the agency, it can be very tedious and difficult to get to the right person. Many people will not help you until you get referred, meaning you've already been deemed best qualified by the HR specialist.
And Corliss, just one more thing about that. In terms of getting referred. So a lot of folks, when they apply to USA Jobs, they see those questions, and the questions, some of them say, to basically to what extent are you skilled in this particular thing, like 1 to 5, 5 I think being that you're an expert, but if you don't put an expert, then you don't get referred. Is that true? You have to answer 5 for everything?
Yeah, so there's something called an assessment questionnaire, multiple choice questionnaire. There's somewhere between 5 and maybe up to 300 questions. You have to answer at the highest possible level that you can muster up. So this means looking at your volunteer work, looking at your paid work experience, look at your training, and figure out how you can answer, yes, I'm an expert, I'm the queen bee, I teach everybody how to do everything. That is going to be a computer that screens you in or out of the process. And if you don't answer at the highest possible level, because most people are a little bit modest about their background, if you don't answer at the highest possible level, you will not move forward, and nobody will see your resume. So whatever package you have is going to be for naught if you don't move forward in that first step.
And highest possible level always means 5, correct? The expert level?
Well, they sometimes reorganize the questions. They think they're smart, so.
Okay.
So you
All
have
right.
to be careful about that.
Got it. Thank you, Corliss. Thank you for all of that. And I know you have lots more to share. In fact, on your website, you do have a lot of videos, correct? You want to direct people?
I do. So there's a
that?
YouTube page for Fed job results, and I'll put that in the chat box in just a moment.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Well, so because Corliss mentioned networking, we're going to go ahead with question 3, which actually is very much about networking. And this is a private sector question, which is what's the best way to convert an employee connection at a target company into an advocate or leverage multiple connections at a company. So the person who wrote this obviously knows that one of the best ways to get a job in the private sector is through networking, and specifically through getting what some of us call an internal champion, right? Somebody to champion your candidacy beyond the ATS, the applicant tracking system, to actually get a real live human being in that organization to refer you either to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager will then kick it over to the recruiter, or refer directly to the recruiter. And I'm going to address this a little bit, and then Julian and Mike are also going to address this because we all have different perspectives on this concept. And what I'm going to suggest is that LinkedIn is just a fabulous way to get to that person. So if you go to LinkedIn into the search bar and you type in the organization's name and hit enter, and then hit the people button, which is the on the upper left, what'll happen is you're going to see all of the people who work at that organization. And then you want to start doing some filtering. So first thing, I would hit the connection button. And then in the connections, you're gonna see first, second, and third levels. Try to first see if you have a first level connection. If you do, fantastic. That's hopefully somebody that you know or acquainted with. And that is probably going to be your most trusted champion, because that's the person who's going to really be able to recommend you. If you go down and hit the second level button and you find somebody who works in that company who's a second level to you, that means you have somebody in between. You have a mutually shared connection. So if Jack is the second level connection to you, and he is the head of the department, right, that you want to work in, or just even if it's not the same department, but somebody who works in that company, you want to go to that mutually shared connection and try to get that person to at least forward your resume, even if that person doesn't know you well and doesn't know all of your qualifications and they can't formally recommend you. At least what you can do is type a message to them, or preferably send them an email and say, hey, Sally, first level contact, I noticed you're connected to Jack. Jack is the director of marketing at Acme Company. I've recently applied, by the way, first apply before you get network access. Very similar to what Corliss said in the private sector, in the government. Apply first, then have somebody champion you in. And you can simply say, hi, Sally, I noticed on LinkedIn you're connected to Jack. Jack's the director of marketing at Acme. I recently applied. Would you consider forwarding my resume to Jack for extra consideration? That's a really good phrase, for extra consideration. You're not asking necessarily for recommendation. You just want to get noticed beyond all of the other hundreds of resumes that they might be receiving. So that's my one tip. Mike, do you want to take over, and then Julian?
Yeah, so definitely you want to make it as easy as you possibly can for your internal friend or your internal champion to forward your resume or forward your email to the recruiter. So what happens is, as a former recruiter, there would be 100 candidates, for example, and if there was 2 or 3 candidates who a colleague of mine had forwarded their resume to me, those people are already at the top of the list. They're already ahead of the others because they're just forefront of my mind. And I've seen a colleague actually take the time to forward an email to me. And so the best thing I think you can do is make it really easy for the recruiter, so they don't have to write their own, hey, here's this person, they have this kind of experience and da da da. So write an email to your contact that they can very easily forward, and it has, the highlights, your main things that really differentiate you at the top, and it's got everything you need that the recruiter needs right in there. So that's just a quick tip.
Yep, it's kind of that birds of a feather flock together concept, right? People like to do business with people they know, like, and trust. So, Julian, any thoughts? Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, there's little to add to that. I agree. Of course, it will depend if your search is confidential or not. If it is not confidential, then you have the option, of course, to ask a broader audience on other social media, such as Facebook or Instagram, etc., where you might ask the question directly, hey, does anyone know anyone at XYZ company and can introduce me there? And then, of course, if it's confidential, I would ask your trusted, beyond LinkedIn, I would ask your trusted advisors around you, people that you trust, and ask them, do you know anyone who knows someone at that company? And that's how you really get somewhere. So do not be shy about asking for help. People, you'll be surprised what people will be willing to do for you and help you and go the extra mile.
It's true. Thank you, Julian. And I just wanted to address this last piece of this question, leveraging multiple connections at a company. So I'm going to give my opinion on this, and Mike and even Julian, if you want to share too. My experience has been that you can't have too many internal champions. It's that whole squeaky wheel concept. I've heard of folks who get referred in for the one job by multiple people. And so it's almost like sort of this confluence of recommendations, like, oh gosh, you really have to, the recruiter needs to meet this person. And in other words, it's not just, you don't just have to get referred by one. If multiple people do it, it actually can help. That's been my experience and what I've heard. Mike, you're nodding your head. If multiple people refer, you're like, okay, got it. I'll interview this person.
Yeah, and I'll just say that if that candidate is reaching out to multiple people, they're clearly very interested. They're taking the time to really get to know the company. They've talked to different people, and that actually bodes very well for a candidate to just show, they're so interested that they have had, not only do they have multiple connections, but they're taking the time to really research and learn what they can about the company. And that really communicates strong interest and is a positive thing.
Great, thanks. Julian, any other thoughts?
No, I mean, I fully agree with what you said. I think you have to distinguish, try to figure out who are the influencers in that company and who are the decision makers. And influencers are, pretty important in my opinion. And also make sure you distinguish people. Some people say they will be willing to help you and they're really not. So if you know them well enough, there are givers and there are takers out there. Surround yourself with givers, and that's usually how you get the best results.
Excellent. Thanks, Julian. All right, so this last question, I do not have a 4-year degree yet, have over 20 years of robust HR experience. What can be done to overcome the bachelor's degree requirements on many job postings? So this is a very common issue. Here's, again, what I'll share, and, Julian and Mike can share as well. So look, a lot of employers will automatically list a bachelor's degree requirement. It's almost like breathing. They just sort of list it there, whether or not it actually is a formal requirement. It's kind of just something that they do. So I'm not saying whether it is or is not a requirement, but it's not always a requirement, even if they list it. So my main tip is, look, apply anyway. Oftentimes, if your background speaks for itself, there's a good percentage of the time that they're going to consider you anyway, and let your experience overcome maybe what might have been an artificial requirement for a bachelor's degree. But here's one tip I have to share with you. Please do not misrepresent your credentials. I had it happen a while back where because I'm a recruiter, not just a coach, so I was trying to place somebody in a job, and she misrepresented herself. She listed that she had a bachelor's degree when she didn't. The employer checked her credentials. She didn't have it. She lost the job. Literally, the offer was rescinded. And as it turns out, I asked her, why did you list that? She said, this is her story. She said, I was 2 credits shy of getting my degree. And this was back many years ago. She said, my husband did not want me to go forward with a degree. He wanted me to just stay. He just didn't want me to do it. And she said, I was so close. She said, I just decided to just list that I had it. Well, unfortunately, that cost her the job. So please, please, please be as accurate as possible. And even if you could say, in a case like hers, what I would have told her to say is list it and say, earned, X number of credits toward, or, pursued a bachelor's degree 2 credits shy, something like that, right? So the person knows, the employer knows that you almost got it, but maybe there were some extenuating circumstances. Okay, so that's my take on that. Apply anyway. Mike, Julian, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would say once you've applied anyway, which I agree, I think it cannot hurt to find on LinkedIn who the hiring manager is and maybe follow up with a note to them, and being very honest and upfront and say, look, I just applied. I do not have a bachelor's degree. However, I am, XYZ. Here is where, very short, very sweet, but very to the point. And I think people respect honesty, and at least you get an extra touch, if you will.
Yes.
And if that hiring manager is compelled enough to look at your LinkedIn profile and say, "Ooh, maybe I should," they will nudge the recruiter, and then you're more likely, I think, to have at least a discussion around this position that you want.
Thanks, Julian. Mike, any thoughts?
I agree with all that.
Great,
That's good.
perfect. Okay, so let's go ahead and shift gears here. So Mike, you're going to be Corliss, you said you were going to help us with our chat box. So if you want to open that up and let us know what the next question is.
Yeah, so we have a question on ageism, and I just have to find it here. Whoa, there we go. How can you overcome ageism during this time of so many people being out of work?
Yeah.
And I'll just do a short plug for the federal government. Government is hiring. They're hiring a lot of people virtually. And one of the things that really you can circumvent by looking at a federal job is ageism. And the reason is the salary is pre-negotiated. So there's a range from X to Y of what you are going to make if you're selected for that job. And that takes a lot of the ageism out of the equation. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. They're looking mostly for the types of skills you bring to the table. So if you're 133 years old and you can do the job, they can hire you. And there's no, you can negotiate your salary within a certain range, but we already know when you apply what that range is, and we're not playing that guessing game. And I think that's important.
Corliss, I'm so glad you mentioned the federal government and ageism, because a lot of people have said to me over the years, yeah, but the federal government is the only place that requires you to list when you graduated from high school. Like, it's actually illegal everywhere else to do that, and the federal government asks you that. So given that you have to put that in.
That's not true. So you don't have to put your year in. It's optional. So I never put a year in for a degree, and I don't go back to high school. So that's
so even if they ask you for high school, you don't have to fill that out.
Well, if it's a requirement, they'll tell you what's required in the vacancy announcement, and they usually don't ask for that. What they will do is they'll ask you, well, the requirement is that you go back 10 years. So, if you were born in 1928, you're going to go back 10 years from today on your resume. So the last 10 years is all you need. And then if you have a degree, you list it, but I'd never list the date with that degree.
Okay. I thought that on USA Jobs, there was a box that said, when did you graduate high school? I thought that is still there.
There may be, it's optional. They change every month. So it may not be there. They're using an agile technology. So
all right, good to know. You're our update person on the federal government. So thank you for that. In the private sector, look, I wish there was an easy way around this. I mean, none of us can give a panacea answer, because age discrimination, unfortunately, is alive and well. That said, actually, to Corliss's point, one of the main tips, and some of you have probably heard this, so there's two things. It has to do with is the number of years you go back on your resume, and then what you do with your education. So I personally recommend to go back about 15 years, maybe 20 on your resume, no more than that if possible. And if you do have experience that's prior to 20 years, what I recommend is on your resume, have a section at the bottom that says prior experience, and simply list company and title, not dates. And only do that if you feel like the companies that you worked for, the employers that you worked for early in your career, were so significant. Maybe the company had a certain kind of gravitas, or it was you just wanted to let people know you started at a certain place. Like, for example, I had a client once who was a communications leader, and she just wanted people to know that she started out as a journalist way back when. So she listed that at the bottom, but didn't put any dates. So that's one way to overcome it. And number two is, as you might imagine, with your education, do not list the years that you graduated. List that you graduated, but not the years. And on LinkedIn, you want to have the most professional picture that you possibly can. You want it to be bright and energetic and really forward-looking, right? So that people know that you are just at the top of your game, and that there's no need to discriminate against you by anything other than your skills, because that is, of course, how people discriminate back and forth, and that's legitimate, right? They can screen you in and out, but they shouldn't be looking at any other criteria. So Mike and Julian, any thoughts on age discrimination?
I'll share that, like you said, Shira, so it is a challenge with larger companies because they have so many candidates and they're household names. And so there's a lot of candidates that are applying, and these companies can afford to advertise on LinkedIn and all these job boards. And so they're getting just lots and lots of candidates, right? So I would consider small to medium-sized businesses that are not household names, that maybe are just not as visible because they're, they can't afford to pay for these job advertisements. And so that's a better way, I think, to sort of overcome that, is to apply places where there's not already hundreds of candidates just based on the fact that it's such a household name.
Great, thanks, Mike. Julian?
Yeah, I would also consider, especially timing-wise, if we're addressing right now, I would explore the contingent workforce part of the economy, sort of what people refer sometimes to as the gig economy, even though this is not a 1099, it's really a W-2. So essentially what's happening in a short, as short as I can make it, the trend is companies are hiring more and more for a specific timeline. Usually it's on the contingent workforce, it's about 6 months to 2 years. And that is a good way to get around ageism, if you will, because they just want the best person right now, and they value experience. And the more experience you have in a particular area, of course, it has to be very specific, but it opens up a lot more than what you think. And that area of our economy is growing double digit every year. Even in this crisis right now, we're seeing about a 15% increase year over year this year. So I would encourage you to look at the contingent workforce. If you don't know where to look, I can give you the name of the companies that are the big players in contingent workforce out there. And to me, that's a good way to get back into the job market or find something else.
Julian, if you wouldn't mind putting some of that in the chat box, that would be fantastic.
Okay.
Thanks so much. All right, so Corliss, next question.
When you've applied to a job you are eminently qualified for and you don't hear anything back, not even thanks for your application, what do you do? Especially if you don't have a hiring manager contact and if you've employed your network to weigh in on your behalf. Any strategies? How long is too long?
Mike, I could answer this, but I think this is really in your wheelhouse since you did all the corporate recruiting for so long.
Sorry, I was reading a question I was about to address, so could you start with that?
Yep,
Could you
so
start,
what
Shira?
do you do when you've applied? Oh, she wants you to start, Shira.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So first of all, let me just go back to LinkedIn for a second, because you may not know a hiring manager, but there's more to mine within LinkedIn than what you might think, okay? So again, go back to that search bar, put in the name of that company, see who comes up. Even if it's a third level connection, and a third level I know is not as powerful as a first or a second because you don't know who the contact is, but there are creative ways sometimes to actually find that person. I know you don't want to be nudgy, but you could even send a very brief professional note to that person to express your interest level in the role. Say that you've recently applied, you look forward to hearing back. Even that, not too pushy, not a whole dissertation, but just to say, you wanted to re-express your interest. The fact of the matter is that employers are so overwhelmed, particularly large companies, that they often don't have a mechanism to get back to candidates on a regular basis. Some do. Some actually have an automated system that just says, thank you for your resume. Most don't. So this is, in the job, especially in a job search world like now, you have to pack your patience. Yes, your resume might go into cyberspace, and yes, this is exactly why it is so important to try to get an internal champion if you possibly can. So, again, there's not a lot of panaceas I can share with you other than you may not hear back at all. If you can even find the HR person, because most times on a website of an organization, going beyond LinkedIn, you should be able to even call the receptionist if they have one, and even if they don't, if they have an automated voicemail, press 2 to get HR. You might even leave a voicemail. I mean, whatever you can do just to make sure that your resume was received, it's okay. Don't overdo it. You don't want to be nudgy, but if you want to try one time, I think that's fine. Mike, did you have any other thoughts around this?
I think you covered it well.
Okay, good.
If I may chime in, I might be a little bit more aggressive in my stance, but I do think that sometimes it's not sometimes, because we deal with a lot of people who send hundreds of applications, and here on 1 or 2% of it, it's extremely frustrating. So as Shira said, I think you can bypass HR and send a note to the hiring manager and say, look, I just applied, I haven't heard back, you know, and that's it. And often, you know, because you don't want to be lost, you get lost in cyberspace, but often the hiring manager will actually send a note to HR and say, hey, can you respond to that person, please? And that's how you get a response. But obviously, if you don't, move on. Because if you keep on, you know, it's hard as it is, and you just gotta, you know, you cannot get a response, then you've tried everything. I would say just move on, because they're just not worth your time. If you're invested, you tried, you're not getting a response, then they're just not worth, it's not meant to be.
And I would also, while we're not exactly talking about resumes right at the moment, I do want to take a step back, and that is getting noticed in the first place. So yes, the internal champion, as we've said, is incredibly important. So are key words on your resume. You will hear this probably in every single job search group that you will ever go to. The keywords are the key. And when I talk about keywords, I'm talking about the key competencies, the specific functional areas that they have listed on that job announcement. You want to make sure that you have got them up and down all throughout your resume, preferably in a short area in the top. I prefer a text box. And then I would also recommend next to every single job bullet. So you know how you have your dot, right, your bullet, and you have your accomplishment story. Hopefully it's an accomplishment story, not just a job duty. Make sure it's an accomplishment. And then right before that, so in between the bullet and the accomplishment story, label that accomplishment with a competency. Financial analysis, project management, board engagement, whatever that competency is, and make sure it matches what the search announcement is saying. Comb through that search announcement, that job announcement, up and down. Don't just do a 60-second gloss over and send a generic resume in. You've got to make sure it matches. You've got your career goals, but they have their business goals, and their business goals are really embedded all throughout that announcement. So the more you can comb through every word, every line, and pull out what they're looking for and make sure it's embedded, customize your resume for every single job. Yes, it takes time, I know, but it's worth it in the end, because an employer is going to appreciate that you've taken the time to do that. Okay, so moving on. Corliss, next question.
Yeah, next question. How do you find small and mid-sized businesses that do not have name recognition?
Mike?
Yeah, Mike.
I can take that one. So this is where networking comes in. So this is where I mean, you are getting to know a lot of your friends, and they're letting you know about their company that's hiring. You are just doing research, and you're looking at lists. You know, there's states, there's organizations that say, you know, here's all the companies that are hiring in Virginia, or here's all the companies that are hiring in Arizona. And so you kind of have to do some internet research to just see, oh, okay, here's the companies that are hiring. They may not be the most visible on LinkedIn or other websites, but you know, they're hiring. Or Google Jobs. Google is good about just collecting a lot of just different job openings that, you know, may or may not be posted on some of the larger job boards such as LinkedIn. So those are a couple ways to find the small to medium-sized businesses.
And I would also recommend going back to LinkedIn. You'll hear me talk about LinkedIn a lot because it's just such a wonderful tool. So one of the things you can do with the search bar is you could actually type in keywords. So for example, let's say you are a project manager. Type in project manager in the search bar, hit enter. And what will happen is all of the project managers, meaning your colleagues, maybe even just people who are at your level, will come up. And you can start to and then I would actually do a second filter under locations. So you click on locations and type in whatever your location is. So here in the DC area, LinkedIn now calls us the DC Baltimore area. Don't ask me why, they lumped us all together. And you can filter by that. Now, when you look down at your colleagues, start opening up their profiles. See where they've worked, because if they are a project manager, they've obviously had project manager jobs. Where did they work? Look down their experience section. That's wonderful market research for you. You can start clicking on the names of those companies that they've worked at, companies that might be nameless and faceless to you. They're not necessarily name brand. And so a lot of times those are the small to mid-sized companies that are hidden. But again, because you know they've hired project managers in the past, maybe, just maybe, those companies have some openings right now. Okay. Corliss, next question.
Shira, we are close to our time frame, and I don't think we have
Yes.
any questions that have not been answered yet. So
Okay, wow,
it is
fabulous. Anybody want to
9:56.
open up their mic and ask just a freebie?
Shira, can I just add one more thing to?
Sure.
So the other thing I wanted to mention about finding maybe a small to mid-sized organization, but it actually applies for about any opening you're interested in, is if they're, before the pandemic, if you went to a career fair or you went to a networking event and you spoke to someone within a company or organization, that is a really good connection or a really good thing to add to your email that you might send to someone who's internal in the company you're interested in. So just think about what connections do you have to a company that you met at an event, representative you met at an event maybe a year or two ago, and that can actually really help when you're sending a cold email to, or when you're sending an email to a contact at a company, to just show you're not just another candidate, but you've actually taken the time and spoken with someone at that organization.
Perfect. All right. Anyone have another quick question before we wrap up for 10 o'clock and then go into speed networking? Yes, Jean?
Yeah, so the question I have is that I use a tag crowd and sometimes job scan. The real question is that you see a tag crowd will tell you what are the skill or whatever what the
Keywords?
job. Yeah, the keyword at the job. Yeah. So my question is that how do you pass out what is critical and so that you put in your resume? Because what happens is that you will see a job both says director of this.
I'll give you the quick answer. Here's what you do. So first of all, you have to go beyond artificial intelligence, okay, and use your own intelligence. And here's how you do it. Ready?
Yes.
First of all, look at this. If most job announcements are laid out as follows: a summary of the job, the responsibilities, and the qualifications. Usually that's how it works. Look through each section as follows: the summary of the job. Really read it. What are they highlighting? What are the business goals that they want you to achieve in that job? Number one. Number two, in the responsibility section, focus on the first 3 bullets, because employers will put the most important responsibilities at the top, as opposed to bullet number 15, which says other duties as assigned, right? Okay, first 3 bullets, maybe first 4 bullets, right up top. Number 3, exactly the same way, the qualification section, same thing, first 3 or 4 bullets. Now, with the qualifications, here's the kicker. 2 things. Number one, when in this market especially, but it's been for a while, when an employer says such and such a skill or such and such an industry is preferred, they usually mean required. Now, they're not saying required, but the reality is that's what ends up happening, because they are looking for what we call in recruiting a purple squirrel. Okay, so they are literally preferring, they're giving preference to somebody with those skills. So if you have it, list it, okay, first 3. The other tricky part in the qualification section is that what people don't understand is that in that qualification section, you have what's called hard skills and soft skills. So the hard skills are the functional skills. Those are like the financial analysis, the board relations, the research, project management, things you do. They're also listing soft skills. Oh, we want a team player and a great communicator. And you're saying, well, I'm a team player, I'm a great communicator. That's not what gets you the interview, okay? You might be all of those things and you can talk about them in the interview. That's not what's going on your resume, okay? So don't just look at that section and say, oh, well, I have these soft skills, therefore I should apply. Make sure you have the hard skills, or at least most of them. And then in that qualification section, pull those out from the top. That is what needs to go, be highlighted, especially, by the way, if you have some qualification skills or experience from a long time ago, pull it up to the top. You could have a separate section at the top of your resume that says, for example, let's say they're looking for healthcare experience and you did healthcare, I don't know, 15 years ago. You could have a separate section at the top that says relevant healthcare experience. And then just pull out a few relevant bullets and then start the chronological section of your resume. So it's an interesting way to kind of bring your relevant experience up to the top.
That's fantastic.
Hopefully that's helpful. It is.
Yeah, so the last thing is that, so when you say prefer means required, does it mean that every time you come across those, should we just pass?
Not
and move
apply?
on?
No, you can certainly apply, but I want you to manage your own expectations about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely apply. Just be like, well, I know this
Yeah.
might be a long shot.
Okay. Thank you.
That's all. That's all. Okay. All right. So we're at 10 o'clock. And so what we're going to do now is let me just wrap up with a couple of closing slides here to give you our contact information. And then we're going to break out into the speed networking. So, oh, and I'm so sorry, Julian is new to our group, and I apologize. Julian is not on this list. So Julian, if you could put your email address in the chat box, that would be great. I'll make sure next week you're back on here. Feel free to share Higher Movement Mastermind with your colleagues. Here's the meetup link. Feel free to take a picture of this slide. And I also want to give special thanks and note the other job seeker groups, particularly here in the DC area. They have a lot of free programs. Now, I do want to mention at the bottom right, the JCA has something called the Career Gateway. It is a low-cost, week-long program. It's actually going to be starting up on September 11th. It's $75. It's just one, and it's specifically for professionals over 50. But all of these groups are terrific, and just highly recommend them to you. And just wanted to wrap up this section with an inspirational quote from the Bible. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. And this is certainly a time, and all the time, right, where we should be looking to God for our strength and encouragement, particularly in times like this for our job search needs. He is there to help and provide for us. Okay, so with that, for those who would like to stay on for the speed networking, I'm going to go ahead and you do those breakout rooms now. So go ahead and actually you're going to go back right into the same rooms that you were in. So in the speed networking, let me just give you a little bit of advice here to make it kind of a more robust experience. What I suggest is that you, when you go around your room, that you share the following with your colleagues. What I call your lane and your tribe. What I mean by that is your lane is your profession. It's your career path. So let's say you're in accounting or research or project management or marketing. Your tribe is your industry or sector, okay, that you need to, that you may have an affiliation with. So maybe you are in the accounting lane, but you are in the nonprofit tribe. So you are an accountant for nonprofits. Now, you may not have a tribe. You might be cross-tribal, and that's fine too. Maybe you just have a lane. But sometimes it can be helpful to your colleagues to know if you do have a tribe, because maybe they're from the same tribe, and maybe you can do some networking with them, or you're in the same lane, or they know people who are in one or the other. And you may also want to mention if there are certain kind of companies that you're trying to get into, maybe somebody in that call has a contact for you. Okay, so you're going to be in there. Let me just make sure. You're going to be in there for 15 minutes, all right? And then we'll come back, and then we'll wrap up. Okay, so happy networking.